Welcome back. We start with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who has expressed concern over the use of force in protests against the controversial citizenship law in India. Speaking to reporters in New York, UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric said Secretary General pressed India to respect freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. Last week, the United Nations called India's new citizenship law fundamentally discriminatory. Meanwhile, mass protests continue across India against the controversial law. The government has banned public gatherings in northeast Delhi. The section is imposed after clashes between student protesters and police in Salimpur area of Indian capital. 6 people have been killed in protests since last week, as thousands have been arrested by police. In a related development, the Indian Supreme Court has issued a notice to the government seeking clarification over the controversial citizenship law. The court is hearing 60 petitions filed against the law by activist Harsh Mandir, historian Irfan Habib, economist Prabhat Patnaik, and others. During a hearing, the court issued notice to central government and asked it to publish the act for public to read. The court adjourned the hearing till next week. In the pleas, petitioners have argued granting citizenship on religious basis goes against the grain of Indian constitution. The petitioners asked the top court to declare the new law as unconstitutional. There have been widespread protests across the country since the new law came into effect. Meanwhile, Pakistan's minority Hindu community has rejected India's offer to grant them citizenship under a new law. New Delhi's controversial act offers citizenship to minorities from neighboring countries. Hindu Council said Pakistan's Hindu community unanimously rejects this bill, which is dividing India on communal lines. It said a true Hindu will never support this legislation. Pakistan's Sikh and Christian communities have also strongly rejected the bill, terming it against basic human rights. U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad has discussed the Afghan peace process with President Ashraf Ghani. Ghani's spokesperson Sadiq Siddiqui says Khalilzad briefed the president on the status of negotiations with the Taliban and the recent Islamabad meeting. He said Ghani expressed his concern about continued violence by the Taliban. Siddiqui said the president told Khalilzad that Afghan people and government want immediate peace in the country. The spokesperson said both sides voiced hope that a ceasefire will soon take place in Afghanistan. The UN says an average of 9 children have been killed or maimed every day in Afghanistan in the year 2019. In a report, the global body said in 9 months, over 600 children were killed and over 1,800 injured. The report said data shows an 11% increase in the killings as compared to last year. It said this situation is largely due to a surge in suicide bomb attacks and clashes between Taliban and Afghan forces. The UN body said even by Afghanistan's grim standards, 2019 has been particularly deadly for children. The U.S. Senate has approved a defense bill of $738 billion. The bill includes policy measures to sanction troops and others who committed war crimes in Syria. President Donald Trump has promised to immediately sign the Senate-approved bill into law. The bill creates a space force, the first new branch of the U.S. military in more than 60 years. The legislation calls for mandatory sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream gas pipelines between Russia and Europe. The bill also sanctions Turkey over its acquisition of a Russian defense system and prohibits the transfer of F-35 jets to Ankara. The bill defies any restrictions on the U.S. president from waging war against Iran and the deployment of low-yield nuclear weapons. This is the most expensive set of military measures in the nation's history. In Syria, airstrikes by government forces have killed 24 people in Idlib. The Syrian Civil Defense says 22 people were wounded in the attacks. It said women and children are among the dead. Idlib is the last major stronghold of rebels who have been fighting government forces since 2015. The war in Syria has killed over 370,000 people and displaced millions of others since 2011. The U.S. has extended its support to Bolivia's interim president, Jeanine Áñez. President Donald Trump said Áñez is working to ensure a peaceful democratic transition through free elections. In a Twitter post, Trump denounced the ongoing violence in Bolivia, both from inside and outside the country. Meanwhile, former President Evo Morales said even though he will not be a candidate, he has a right to remain politically active. He named his former economy minister, Luis Arce Catacora, and former union boss, Andronico Rodriguez, as his party's potential presidential candidates. After years of delay, NATO will receive its second US-made Global Hawk drone tomorrow. The alliance aims to have the 5 unmanned aircraft in its own and $500 million surveillance system operational in 2022. NATO says the drone system will be the world's most advanced. It will give NATO 24-hour, near real-time surveillance of land and sea beyond its borders. An official says after Thursday's delivery of the second drone, 3 more will arrive before next summer. He said the alliance is attempting to create a small air force. U.S. President Donald Trump has accused House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of declaring war on American democracy in a 6-page open letter. Trump faces an impeachment vote over allegations that he obstructed Congress and pressured Ukraine for personal political gain. Pelosi said she had not read the letter but found its essence to be sick. Only 2 former U.S. presidents, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, have been formally impeached by Congress. Other than Trump, only Richard Nixon has faced a formal impeachment inquiry in the House of Representatives. No U.S. president has ever been removed from office by this process. A simple majority in the House can impeach a president, followed by a trial in the Senate. Only a 2/3 Senate majority can remove a president of the United States from office. In Panama, 12 inmates have been killed and 13 others wounded in a gun battle inside a prison near the capital city. Police say the shootings occurred in a cell block of inmates from a single local gang. They said several guns were seized after the skirmish. President Laurentino Cortizo said the incident suggested jail guards helped smuggle in the weapons. In France, transport and public services remain disrupted as strikes against government pension reforms entered their 14th day. Hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets in cities across the country. This report has all the details.
From Eiffel Tower operators to doctors, the strikes have drawn French workers from all sectors of the economy. Protesters are demanding the government take back its pension reforms that ask them to retire later or face reduced payouts. But the government says it won't back down from its plan. Speaking in Parliament, Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said the reforms will be turned into a bill by January 2020.
We've clearly stated what our project is, and on this project, on the creation of a universal pension system, my determination, that of the government and that of the entire majority, is total. I am saying this clearly, total.
Police fired tear gas to disperse the protesters in central Paris, but demonstrators are determined to continue the strike until their demands are met. Even pension chief Jean-Paul Delavoye's resignation could not calm their anger.
If we accept a Christmas break, then we're stopping the strike. If we don't strike, then Macron is passing his reform, since he said he's passing it in January. So, we have to stop him. We have to be logical. People didn't strike for about 15 days just to stop and say, no, let's go see Santa Claus.
French trade unions have called for a major push before the holidays, urging workers across all sectors to go on strike and join the countrywide protests.
We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. It's been a year since the Sudanese started protesting for the removal of former dictator Omar al-Bashir. The ex-president was recently found guilty on corruption charges and sentenced to 2 years in detention. Sudan is now looking for a new start, but its economy is still in recession because of US sanctions. Details in this report.
Sara Al-Fateh runs a cooking oil factory in Khartoum. She spends most of her day at a factory and has a crew of dedicated workers. But she's struggling to keep the business running because she cannot order replacement parts for her machines. Al-Fateh blames American sanctions for the problem.
We can't make further investments on spare parts because we cannot open a bank account without a letter of credit because of the American sanctions.
Washington imposed a trade embargo on Sudan in 1997 over the state's alleged links to Al-Qaeda. The curbs affected Khartoum's access to international banking networks, as well as trade in technology and spare parts. The sanctions were eventually lifted in 2017, but the country is still on Washington's state sponsors of terrorism blacklist.
Absolutely no transfers are made from a bank inside Sudan to a country outside Sudan in a convertible currency, whether in dollars, sterling, euros, dirhams, or the Saudi riyal. Nothing. There is never any transfer done through the banking system.
In today's post-Bashir Sudan, inflation is hitting 60% and the country's foreign reserves are empty. The country's civilian-appointed Prime Minister, Abdullah Hamdok, visited Washington, D.C. in December and asked for Sudan to be removed from the blacklist. But this won't happen until the U.S. is assured Bashir's regime is dismantled. As such, post-Bashir Sudan is off to a rough start.
In Malaysia, the Kuala Lumpur Summit 2019 kicks off today and is being attended by leaders from Turkey, Iran and Qatar. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan arrived today in Malaysia to take part in the summit. Indonesia will be represented by Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi after Vice President Maruf Amin cancelled his scheduled visit. The summit aims to address issues of concern to Muslim countries. Japan is pressing Russia to return 5 fishing vessels seized near disputed islands north of Hokkaido. The Foreign Ministry says the crew did nothing wrong and should be quickly released on humanitarian grounds. It said the boats were seized by Russian border guards yesterday. The ministry said the crew members volunteered to show guards what they had on board. Russia asserts the boats were seized so they could be inspected. Meanwhile, Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi arrived in Moscow today ahead of a planned meeting with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. Australia has recorded its hottest day as the national average temperature hit a record high of 40.9 degrees Celsius. The new record may not last long because forecasters are predicting a more intense heat wave later in the week. The Bureau of Meteorology said the previous record of 40.3 degrees Celsius set in January 2013 fell on Tuesday. The reason for the baking temperature is a positive Indian Ocean dipole, where the sea surface is warmer in the western half and cooler in the eastern ocean. The record comes as the nation battles a severe drought and bushfire crisis. Prime Minister Scott Morrison's government has been criticized for its response to the fires and its climate policies. Mexico City witnessed lots of funny business as clowns filled the streets with bursts of colors and sound. The performers made their annual pilgrimage to the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe. After dancing and singing through the streets, the clowns arrive at the iconic Mexican Basilica for Mass. Dressed in colorful costumes, professional pranksters from all over Mexico walk to the Basilica to attend a Mass in honor of the saint. The Virgin of Guadalupe is patron saint of Mexico and revered by millions of the Roman Catholic faithful. As members of the Clown Club of Mexico, performers have been making the pilgrimage for over 30 years.
To give thanks for all the work, for all that has been achieved this year, and for another year to again visit her. It gives me joy and peace to walk this path.
Japan's exports have slipped for a 12th straight month in November, raising the risk of a fourth quarter contraction. The country's official data really reveals exports fell about 8% year-on-year in November. Declining shipments to the US and China resulted in the longest period of falling exports since a 14-month stretch to November 2016. Japan's trade balance posted a deficit of 82 billion yen, defying the gargantuan estimates forecasted by economists. Earlier this month, the country unveiled a $122 billion stimulus measure to help the economy. European stock markets are trading mixed following UK PM Boris Johnson's promise to block an extension of EU trade talks beyond 2020. Investors are monitoring the developments amid fears of a cliff-edge Brexit. Frankfurt's DAX is trading fractionally lower. London's FTSE 100 is trading marginally higher as Tullow Oil shares gained over 4%, while Pearson shares surged over 3%. The CAC 40 in Paris is trading marginally lower. In Asia, Tokyo's Nikkei 225 closed over 0.5% lower, with auto sector shares declining. Mitsubishi lost nearly 1%, followed by Honda, Toyota, and Suzuki, which tumbled nearly 0.5% each. The Shanghai Composite traded fractionally higher amid upbeat sentiments for a potential Phase 1 trade deal. Meanwhile, international oil prices have edged over 0.5% lower as US crude oil inventory surges. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.